Hello and welcome to the Michael Mamas Show. I'm your host, Michael Mamas, and we're coming to you from Mount Soma, home of the Sri Someshwara Temple in the mountains of western North Carolina. And today we're going to talk about how to negotiate with the gods and what that even means. So it's a I think fascinating topic. Um, the gods. What are the gods? The gods are the personified correlates to different laws of nature. That even in and of itself is a pretty fascinating notion, isn't it? But now when we think of laws of nature, I think generally, don't we, Scotty, we think of, it's a law of nature. It's a rule. It's like classical physics, and those are the laws and they don't deviate. It's just plug it into a computer, But the laws of nature they're more like a quantum mechanical thing, if you will. They're more, are they a particle or are they a wave kind of a thing? But the idea is that there's some pliability there. They're not completely jelly, but they're not just like a 2x4 either. There's some flexibility. And what modulates that, how it flexes, how it moves, is a function of the personified correlate. You could say that we're all physics, we're electrons, protons, neutrons, but to really relate to us, what we really think of as ourselves, it's the personified correlate. But nevertheless, having an understanding of the mechanics is so important to our health, to our well-being. So we're both. But when it comes to negotiating with the laws of nature, you see, then what we're doing is we're functioning in an arena that is best served, most tangibly accessed through the personified component. Just like when you relate to another person, it's the same idea. To relate to another person, you're relating to the personified value of that person, even though they are a bunch of protons, electrons, and neutrons on one level and from one perspective. But we interface with the personified correlate, and so there's some play there. There's an interesting thing. I had a professor in college. He was an economist. He was a brilliant guy. He was great. Really, you have some professors that stand out in your life. Even I have some school teachers I think of before college. And this guy was one of them. He was just really great and really bright guy, nice, good man, But he once said something that I found very interesting. He said that, the economists try to predict the direction of things, and you can get kind of general trends in that. But he said it's a little bit like with the leaves falling off a tree in autumn. Where each leaf actually hits the ground, where it actually lands, you can't calculate it. It's too vast. It's too complex. There are fundamental laws of nature, right? Gravity, wind, like that. But there's some play in there. Now, imagine if you could negotiate with those laws of nature in a more generalized sense when it comes to what unfolds in your life. The net result, there's a wide range there where those leaves are going to hit the ground, how your life is going to unfold. But when it comes to the subtle laws of nature, see, that's what makes all the difference. That determines if a leaf falls, in a beautiful part of a pasture, or if it falls in a mud puddle. And it's subtle. So if we can negotiate, if we can commune with those laws of nature, it can change everything. And if we can't, things can be left up to chance, or even worse, we can compromise the relationship with those laws of nature. So how do we go about negotiating with the laws of nature? I think, well, probably, certainly from a Western perspective, I guess it would, well, there'd probably be twofold. One would be prayer. And prayer, it's even been proven. They've done statistical studies with people, groups of people praying and like that. Statistical studies show it does have an effect. And that's just science, that's just statistics. But prayer, generally speaking, isn't on the, well, it's not on the transcendental level of life. It's on generally a deeper level of our being, a soulful level of our being, like that. But the deeper we can come from, the more profound, the more tangible, the more accessible, the more we are able then to, you could say, negotiate with the gods, but it's not like a bargaining, it's more like embodying, and at least for a period of time, like you could say meditation is the highest form of prayer. Why? Because we rest into the depth of our being. We rest into that transcendental level of our being, that level of being within which the gods dwell. And so our negotiation, if you will, or if you want to call it a negotiation or prayer, whatever you want to call it, it becomes more powerful. Now, what determines, other than how deep we go, how deep into the self, what else determines the power of the prayer, the power of the meditation? The personified correlate, you see, the gods do have a personified component. And so that personified quality relates to an individual in a certain way. We get along with some people more than others. Same idea. It won't necessarily be that they don't like you or something like that, but it's more about you and how you live your life. A staunch scientist may relate to the gods in a very different way than a musician. The idea is that each individual, and you can see this in your Jyotish chart, in your astrology chart. Some people may have a very strong Mercury, other people may have a very strong Venus, different qualities, and those qualities are how we function, and those become like our gateway or our interface, not just with the gods, but with other people as well. That's how we function, you see?
Michael, isn't this the thing that really should merge science and religion too? Is it's like, because it's like, is one right or is the other? Are these guys crazy or these ones crazy or these ones?
You see that? Yes, I mean, and it's a great point. That's what it's all about, really. That's what all these podcasts and everything are about. You the two have to be integrated,
right?
And so right now in the arena of spirituality, there's a heavy leaning in the direction of the emotional or the personified to the point where it abandons the rational, if you will, component. But one stabilizes the other, and it doesn't mean that a musician or a painter has to become a physicist, but nevertheless, in a spontaneous way, because the integration of their physiology and their awareness, they spontaneously live in accord with the laws of nature to some degree. Because the more in harmony with nature you're living, the more powerful your negotiations, if you want to say it that way, the more powerful your prayer. You see?
And
But
also,
these things, you see, we it's almost like, well, what did Abraham Lincoln say when somebody said, well, we're going to win the Civil War because God's on our side? I believe it went something like this. And Lincoln said, well, I'm more concerned about whether or not we're on God's side than whether or not he's on our side, you know?
yeah,
And it's kind of like that, because so much of how we approach prayer, approach spirituality, is a function of, do you want to speak God's language, or do you want God to learn to speak your language? Do you want your preconceived notions, your ideas of how spirituality works and how religion works and what it should be like? And therefore, that's how we're going to pray and that's how we're going to live our lives? Or are we going to do it in a way where we really more listen, if you will, try to understand, try to gain a deeper understanding of, how the gods function, how God functions, how the universe works. So we can't tell the universe how to work. The universe works the way it does. And so the challenge then is to align with it. Am I on track here or did I change the subject?
No,
Yeah.
I think so. And it unifies religions too, because you have the monotheistic where, God is all of these different mechanics, right? And it's just
Yeah.
different bases of it. And then there's the polytheistic, which have different gods for every mechanic. And it's like, okay, guys, the language, what you're trying to explain is the same, but you're using different, modalities.
I like to watch documentaries. I have Netflix, but I watch some movies, but mostly I watch documentaries. And there's something now on with Alexander the Great. I don't know if you've seen it. It's, I think, a 6-part series. And in one, he's in Egypt, and some priestess or whatever told him that he was the son of a god or something like that, and they gave the Egyptian name, and then the Greeks latched onto it as Zeus. And somebody was explaining that, the Greeks, they interchange the names more freely than a lot of different religions. And I found that interesting, only because, well, yeah, just what you're saying, Scotty. These are laws of nature, and rose by any other name, and different cultures have different names and different languages. But what becomes more important, the language with which a person is identified, or the actual principles of nature underlying that more superficial expression? And so when we talk about negotiating with the gods, with communion with the gods, whose language are we insisting be spoken in the negotiation?
Right. We could clean up a lot of problems if we just.
It's just amazing. Even the different religions, and they fight. I mean, come on, let's find the common thread, that with one thing which underlies everything. And you hear the different quotes from the different religions, and you're like, yeah, but the interpretation of them is too superficial. But it's all right there. It's foundational to every religion, But now when we talk about language, it becomes a very interesting thing. I've talked about Sanskrit and the mechanics of creation and how it all comes out of the vowel sounds from the Sanskrit alphabet. But it's not about Sanskrit as a language because it's the language of our neighborhood. No. It's the sounds of nature itself, you see. And so there's a very powerful way of negotiating with the gods, if you want to say it that way, is the principle of yagyas. Now yagyas mean actions in harmony with nature. So in one sense, as you evolve, your life becomes more and more yagya, But there are they're ceremonies, and if you looked at them without knowing anything about the Vedic tradition or anything like that, you just think it's a ceremony. Yeah, let's do our own ceremony. They had flowers, I remember, and I remember seeing fruits. So let's go get some fruits and flowers, and we'll create our own ceremony. Uh, but see, what we've done is we've taken some of the tools and we've decided to use them to dance to our own tune based upon our own identity, you see. So the power of a yajna is enhanced greatly the more and more those are performed in a manner in harmony with the laws of nature. That's beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so that's really what the Vedic tradition offers, that I just don't see with the same rigor in any of the religion that I've seen. Because they prescribe every movement, how everything's laid out, exactly what order things are to be done in, and so those are the parameters, and there's flexibility in the laws of nature, right? But nevertheless, it's within these parameters it's done. It's just like, you build a cell phone. It's got to be built in harmony with the laws of nature. The cell phone's just not going to work, or certainly not be as effective. And so it's the same kind of thing. Now, one other thing I wanted to touch on here, and that is this notion of anger. When a person gets angry, think about it. When a person gets angry, why do they get angry? It's because something that has occurred that is not consistent with their paradigm identity. And a lot of times their paradigm identity, a lot of components of our paradigm identities are consistent with the laws of nature, but a lot of them aren't. A lot of them deal with our bias, our predispositions, our friends. We favor our friends, and people that aren't friends, we're more inclined to go against them, or we get transferential issues with a person, and therefore we are more judgmental of that person and get more narrow-minded, that sort of a thing. And so the structure then of our psyche is, like we talked about before, is the chit, that storehouse of impressions that is well referred to as the subconscious mind. We're not really conscious of our chit, but our chit dictates how we think, how we feel, what our identities are. And when things go too opposed to that, we get angry. But now, what about the gods? Is it possible for the gods to get angry? I know I've talked in the past, in one of my lectures, I was talking about Jesus. When he turned over the tables at the marketplace, he was angry. And one of the people in the audience had this idea that, anger is a bad thing and gods don't get angry. And Jesus was great, so he wasn't angry. He was just pretending to be angry. And that's just not, it's sweet actually, but that they were feeling that way, but at the same time, it's just not true. He was angry. And so can the gods get angry? Well, yeah, they can. And if you look at the Vedic literature, they sometimes rise up in tremendous anger. But in the case of the gods, what their anger has to do with is the destruction of distortion, the destruction of negativity, the destruction of impurity. So it's a very different thing. If they do get angry, it has to do more with atonement than it has to do with, in the case of with humans, somebody not conforming to your subconscious programming. Okay. But see, here's the thing too. I think particularly in the Christian, there's this thing about a wrathful God and stuff, and I think too often, people get a little almost paranoid I remember once, where was this? This was in New England somewhere, Rhode Island, I think it was. And I was giving this talk, and we got on this subject, and I mentioned about how, if a person goes into church and, they might have a bad word pop into their head, and they're, the guys are going to get mad at me. And it was really interesting because several people kind of could totally relate to that. And that's kind of how they felt and how they lived their life. But in that arena, if it's just something that comes up like that, and it's just kind of a bubbling out of your subconscious, a purification of the chit, you might say, in that regard, the gods are forgiving. That's not how they function. Now, we don't do it on purpose. No, they're forgiving. I'm going to get away with it. But I guess what I'm trying to appeal to here is we don't need to be paranoid. We just do our best. That's it. You just do your best. And we have these tools like the yagyas, the ceremony, the Vedic ceremonies, the prayer, meditation. The deeper we go, the more powerful the prayer. But we don't mean deeply emotional. We mean deeply transcendental. Those are two very different things that are oftentimes blurred, like the distinction between bhava, which is, spiritual devotion and, that kind of oftentimes associated with emotionalism. Well, there's tangential emotionalism and there's bhava, and they may look similar, but they're very, very different, really. And what's the difference? The one who's coming from a deeper transcendental level, the other's coming from, could be a very deep level, but a very deeply emotional level, a heartfelt level. And so it's when the heart gets cultured and when the right and left brains integrate, what we were talking about earlier, Scotty, not that we're sitting there thinking about the physics of bhava, but the spontaneity of the alignment of the physiology with the laws of nature. And then it becomes bhava, not emotional indulgence, you see. And then it becomes more powerful prayer and that a more powerful, if you will, negotiation with the gods. In closing here, one thing I wanted to mention is about, the Rishi, Devata, and Chandas. And I talked about this pretty extensively in the talks on Brahman consciousness and also the Shiva Sutras. Those are previous podcasts. If you go to michaelmamas.com, you could find them. They're listed in there and you could listen to them. But the Devata value it's the process of knowing. And now it's interesting because really, we speak in terms of Rishi, Devata, and Chandas, but really within the mechanic of the absolute, there's no difference. There's no Rishi, Devata, Chandas as three separate things. It's an amalgam. It's a unified whole. And so it's just different ways of looking at that one wholeness from different perspectives, from the Rishi perspective, which is the knower, from the Chandas perspective, which is the known, and from the Devata perspective, which is the process of knowing. But it's interesting that Deva, the quality, it determines the Chandas. You can negotiate. It's like a table may have four legs, but you can grab one leg. In the case of this, we're talking three legs, but you grab one leg and you can move the whole table. And with respect to the Devata value, you can negotiate, you can commune, you can relate to that, and it changes the Chandas value, the manifest quality, which is what we were talking about, Scotty, with, where do the leaves land on the ground? Yeah. And so that Devata component becomes the personified component, you see, becomes a very powerful modality for aligning your life in harmony with the laws of nature, in harmony with the gods. And therefore, when you're living in harmony with nature, then you can have a desire that moves in one direction or another that's in harmony with nature. And the more you're living in harmony with the nature, the more supportive nature you get. Does that make sense, Scotty?
Absolutely.
That's the mechanic. See, to understand the mechanic is important because then our personified relationships become more viable, healthier, more profound, more significant. Okay. I think that's all I had to say about this today, Scotty. So if there's nothing else, we'll close.
No, yeah, that's just like I said. I mean, it's just we need to all look deeper. It seems like you were talking about with
Yeah, and looking deeper is a physiological thing. It's not just okay, I'm going to think more profound thoughts. To think about God is not to actually become more profound in a physiological sense, in a very real sense.
Yeah,
We're still functioning on a certain level. We're just thinking about something deeper. So the human evolution, that's what we call evolution. It's an evolutionary process, you see. Okay, everybody, thanks for listening, and we'll talk with you again next week.